Hello and welcome to Gestalt IT. My name is Tom Hollingsworth and I am an analyst here. We are bringing you a special roundtable brought to you by our friends at Micron, talking about some of the advances that are being made in mobile devices around AI and 5G and some of the technology impacts that you will see going forward as these technologies continue to mature. I'd like to take a moment, though, to introduce the panelists that are part of our roundtable today so you can get to know them before we jump into the discussion. And I'd like to start off today with Gina.
Hi, thanks, Tom. My name is Gina Rosenthal. I'm the founder of Digital Sunshine Solutions. You can find me at digitalsunshinesolutions.com and Gminx on most of the socials. Totally interested in storage and storage devices on a phone. Are you kidding? This is going to be great.
All right. And Stephen.
Hello, glad to be here. I'm Stephen Foskett, organizer of Tech Field Day and publisher of Gestalt IT. Many of you know me as Mr. Storage, but fun fact, my most popular blog post ever have been around the Apple iPhone. So I'm really excited to be talking about this because, of course, we also talk a lot about 5G and Edge on the Utilizing AI podcast.
All right. Thank you for joining us. And also our special guest from Micron, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Tom, thanks. Yeah, my name is Chris Moore. I run marketing for the mobile business unit at Micron Technologies. We make storage and memory. I've actually been doing storage and memory for mobile for over 20 years now. I can't believe it's been that long, but it's actually true. And look forward to this conversation to kind of see where things are going in the future.
All right. Thank you all very much for joining us. Let's jump into this roundtable discussion because I think that there's a lot of really great technology out there that we want to talk about. And conveniently enough, it fits in your pocket. My children are amazed at the fact that I grew up in a time before I had a internet connected supercomputer sitting in my pants pocket the entire time. And it's fascinating to see how quickly these devices have become indispensable to our everyday lives, not just for making phone calls, but for communicating with people who we want to interact with all over the globe, for changing the way that we do simple things like hail a taxi or order food or park. But as technology demands increase and as we advance the way that we connect these devices using things like 5G or the way that we analyze the data that we have through AI algorithms, we're starting to stress these devices more and not just in the ways that we imagine, faster processors and so on and so forth. It's more about the way that the devices are utilizing the memory and the storage that they have, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to bring on an expert here from Micron. But I'd like to start off a little bit with maybe kind of talking a little bit about what this new 5G and AI era means for the impact on mobile devices. And I actually want to start with Mr. AI himself, Stephen. As a host of the Utilizing AI podcast, you talk a lot about the practical applications of AI. So maybe I was hoping you can kind of introduce us a little bit to what does AI mean for these edge devices?
Yeah, that's, I think, the key here. A lot of people have this sort of notion that 5G and mobile devices and so on is sort of a consumer problem that's like, off the table. But truly, I think that all of us can see that mobile devices and edge computing is, in fact, the new world of computing. And frankly, what we've seen on the AI front is this sort of perplexing situation where uh, as we increase the capability of sensors and devices to process data at the edge, we're actually seeing a lot more computation happening there. And conversely, we're actually collecting more data. So in other words, we're not offloading truly from the center to the edge. We're not offloading to these mobile devices. We're actually onloading more data, more work, more processing on edge devices like phones and IoT sensors, as well as edge computing systems at the edge of the network. And I think whether your focus is on networking or storage or servers or virtualization or cloud computing, you're starting to see that processing is happening at the edge, greater volumes of data are happening, and frankly, everything is just expanding. And that these devices are becoming much, much more powerful as well. They have more storage, they have more memory, and they have a lot more processing power to deal with the limitations in bandwidth that they have.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that's actually one of the things that I don't think a lot of people initially realized when they started this whole digital transformation journey to the cloud type story is that, yeah, there are data centers that are completely full of very massive systems, but we also have an increasingly distributed massive supercomputing base. It just happens to be candy bar sized and runs a mobile OS as opposed to running Linux or something like that. And so, as we're starting to see companies realize that huge advantage that exists out there, that's, I think, responsible in part for this kind of onshoring of the technology back to the mobile device. It's like, well, if we've got this thing just sitting out here doing nothing, we might as well do something with it to be able to crunch these analytics before they get sent back to the cloud. Gina, I know that you have been working with a lot of companies and a lot of customers out there that are, trying to solve these storage challenges and trying to understand the new wave of analytics that come around with, increased bandwidth from 5G and more power with AI algorithms. How do you see this challenge evolving in a world where 5G is a pervasive connectivity technology and AI is everywhere we see?
I think it'll be great when we get to a point where people consider the phones, the mobile devices as a piece of the architecture. And if your applications are really being designed to be put wherever they will have the best performance for the user, and now our mobile devices are powerful enough to give us this type of performance, we should think of these as an architecture point, just the same as in the last 20 years, that's how we thought of servers.
Just to add on to what Stephen was saying, I completely agree. To me, one of the really interesting things is when you take all these AI engines and everything we're learning about artificial intelligence and how it can make your life better, what 5G will also bring to the table, something that's probably not talked about enough, is massive connectivity. And that's going to enable something that I find really interesting for the end user in the future, which is contextual awareness. So what I mean by that, this morning when I walked to my car, my phone can talk to my watch, which can talk to my car. As I approached my car, it knew I was getting close to my car, and it could tell me exactly how long it's going to take to work, and even if there's an accident or something, provide some alternative routes. I didn't program it to do that. I didn't do anything. It just does it on its own. I think what 5G is going to really enable, coupled with AI, is more of this personalized contextual awareness. So imagine your phone can talk to your scale in your bathroom, which can talk to your health watch, which can talk to your Peloton, which can talk to a POS system sitting in a restaurant. You go into that restaurant with your family and your phone happens to know you really like apple pie a la mode, right? It knows what you bought in the past. It's seen the trends and it knows what you like, but it also knows maybe you want to be healthy or less healthy. So maybe it says, hey, I saw what you did on the scale this morning. I also saw that you rode your bike and maybe went on a run. So go ahead, have 2 slices today. Or maybe it gives you something more realistic and tells you maybe you should skip it today in my case. But I think that what 5G and AI, when you start talking about cross platforms and all these devices talking to each other, they're going to incrementally improve people's lives and the way that they make these decisions. And what I think is really interesting is in the long-term future, if that's on a 2-year scale, you start talking the 5 to 10-year scale, where these AI systems are actually growing up with you, where you give your 3-year-old an artificial intelligence-based teacher that will teach you to read at 3 years old and will fine-tune your learning style based upon what you're more capable of. And you're going to be more educated and more aware of everything around you at a much younger age as it grows with you over time. I think that the future is just fantastic with these 2 technologies.
I will back any mobile device that tells me that I need an extra slice of pie at the end of the meal. But being someone who has worked with operating systems and applications in the past, I hear a lot of what sounds like to me programs, applications that need to be running at the same time. And I know that a lot of the analytics pieces that we've talked about and that we've seen in the industry are very focused on computational efficiency. Let's make this run as fast as we can in the processor. But I don't hear a lot of people saying things about being able to get that memory, that data out of memory as soon as possible. RAM almost seems like an afterthought sometimes, and maybe that's a side effect of the package that we're putting these devices into and these small form factors. Maybe it's just well, we hope that the RAM and the onboard memory that's in the system on a chip is just fast enough to deal with that. But I also know that just like any other device, whether it's a 5G radio or a CPU, if you can clear that data from the workspace more quickly, it means the device can run more efficiently, both from a power perspective, but also from the ability to get those analytics crunched and sent on to return results. So, is memory a consideration that companies need to be looking at as they move forward, as these things become more robust, as AI becomes more pervasive in all the things that we do, and we have fast connectivity to get back to cloud resources?
Yeah, as somebody who's been watching the AI space very closely, I have to say that memory is emerging as probably the biggest constraint toward AI processing. Quite frankly, if you look at what's been going on with the GPUs that are being used to do a lot of AI processing, and if you look at the directions that these GPU companies are going in, one of the things that they're doing is optimizing for latency and capacity and throughput through to memory. And many of the architectural choices that are happening at the data center level, or at the cloud data center level, which is probably more likely, actually revolve around increasing the ability of feeding these GPUs with access to memory, whether it's segmenting things, whether it's technologies like CXL. All of these things are really focused on optimizing memory because, frankly, we know how to make a ton of processors. What we don't know how to do is keep those processors fed. Do you agree with me there, Chris?
Absolutely. You gave some great examples of what's going on in the cloud, and just wanted to point out it's also happening in the handset. At Micron, we are working on the front edge of new technologies. I guess, about 18 months ago, we were the first to market with LPDDR5, which was the next generation high performance, low power memory that goes in a handset. We are currently working on the next generation product, which is LPDDR5X. Followed on that is LPDDR5Y. These are incremental changes to the LP spec, which will provide faster memories, lower power memories, allowing those AI systems to be more efficient, work with the NPUs and the GPUs, get data back and forth faster. One of the other interesting things is as you move data back and forth faster, a side effect of that is the processor gets the data sooner, can process what it needs to do, and can actually shut down faster, which actually provides longer battery life. It's a secondary benefit of these new faster specs that we're working on with the entire industry. Even so far, we're looking 4 years down the line, you're going to see an LPDDR6 come out. The same is happening on the storage side, by the way, where you had UFS 2.0, which replaced the eMMC spec that had been around for years. And now we're looking to the near future where you'll see UFS 4.0 for even faster speeds. Again, on the storage side, trying to make sure we're transferring this content back and forth to the processor, to the DRAM, so that the end user gets a truly seamless experience.
Chris, Stephen, I think you guys bring up some interesting points here. But I wanted to ask, because we talked about RAM, obviously, but one of the biggest problems that I have on my mobile devices is that application developers don't know how to write slim applications anymore. Everything is bloated and it takes up so much storage space on my device. I'm seriously looking at the possibility of having to upgrade my device purchase, not because I take 8,000 pictures and 4,700 videos of my children, but because that one application that I use on a daily basis keeps adding new features that keep doubling the size of that application every time that I download it. So, are we super concerned not only about main system memory being a precious commodity that we need to manage, but also fast, persistent storage on these devices becoming a huge issue as well?
Personally, I'm not concerned at all. As I said, I've been doing this for a couple decades already. So when I first started, we were using kilobits of NOR flash. And then today we're talking terabytes of 3D NAND memory. The 3D NAND memory, the ability to grow the capacity points outdwarfs the 2D NAND memory geometrically. So we're actually in a stage where every generation we're doubling the density, trebling the density, and you see MLC 3D NAND first came out 5-6 years ago. Now you have TLC, or multi-level cell, going to 3-level cell. You're going to see quad level cell in your handset in the future. I am not at all worried about the capacity points in these phones, because we're just going to keep on doubling and trebling them over time at the same price points you're used to seeing. So you take that, the nature of the technology itself, the nature of Moore's law, now taking Moore's law, not just going in 2 directions, but in going 3 directions, right? And then you add, as we were talking about earlier, the faster interface speeds. I don't see an end to this in sight. And it's one of those things that maybe it's a nuisance if you have a phone that's a year or 2 old and you need to go upgrade. And that's kind of the nature of the beast, I'm unfortunately to say. But over time, it really will be seamless. And as you buy new phones, there'll be plenty of storage.
Yeah, Tom, you sound like the old guy shouting at the cloud. Now you're just shouting at your phone. This darn phone.
But from that perspective too, I think that there's an interesting thing going on here, which is that increasingly, as systems or applications are using more data and we're getting more multimedia heavy applications, they tend to rely more and more on scratch space, sure, but on memory and processing. And so, for example, when I was looking at a phone last time, I was trying to make the decision, do I get the 64 gig or the 128 gig or the bigger gig? And I looked on my phone, I realized I've got the 256 gig phone, but I'm only using like 50 or 60 gigs of storage space. But that being said, I'm absolutely on a daily basis using 100% of CPU and memory space. And so in a lot of cases, I think I'm going to be looking more toward upgrading the processing power and the features of the phone, not the storage capacity, because increasingly we're using cloud-based stuff and it's smarter. And so frankly, I'm less worried about storage capacity on a mobile device than I am about memory and CPU.
I have a question for Chris, actually, because I think we're in the kind of like this time period where the hardware development has really accelerated and is able to do these fantastic things. And it seems like a couple of things, like the software development hasn't caught up to all the cool things they can do with the hardware. And I think that there's probably things that haven't even been invented yet that we'll do with cell phones that'll be really cool. So, what's the best way for people that are trying to keep up with it, without going too far? Or when do you think it'll kind of even out with the software developers?
It hasn't evened out in 40 years of PCs and 20 years of mobile, and I don't expect it to. Part of the reason I went into hardware as opposed to software is thinking about how can I keep ahead of what's coming, right? That's why we come to work every day, really, is we're enabling the future software that, as you said, hasn't been invented yet. A lot of people talk about what's the killer app for 5G. Earlier, we were talking a little bit about contextual awareness, and it's kind of this incrementalism. If you look at the first smartphone definition that I ever saw, it was a phone that had a 10-key numerical keyboard that you could send text messages with a camera inside, and no one knew what the heck you're going to use with the camera. Incrementally, that got better over time, so end users started to get better pictures. Now you can start sending your pictures to your friends. That came with 2G and 3G. And then with 4G, all of a sudden, now you're able to stream live video, you're able to shop from home and do all this work, which AI also enables to customize for it. To the end user, that's been very incremental over time. But it's taken revolutionary hardware to make that happen. It's taken the network expanding algorithmically, geometrically at least, to be able to make that happen. And the software eventually catches up. I had a boss a long time ago that told me, if you build it, they will come. Don't worry about it. You just got to make sure you keep the price points at the right spot, and then consumers and enterprises will definitely take advantage of it.
Chris, that raises a very interesting point from my perspective, because that's one of the things that I feel like becomes a massive issue over time, is that companies spend a very large percentage of their R&D time focusing on one aspect of a device. And how many times have we heard that manufacturer X has the best camera and manufacturer Y has the best processor? And I feel like that certain other aspects of the mobile devices are starting to be, I don't know, left behind because, oh, well, if it doesn't look like a hot rod on the spec sheet, nobody wants to buy it. But then that lack of innovation in those critical areas, like the ones we've talked about, storage and memory, can lead to massive performance problems all over the rest of the system. And I know that Micron has focused in the past and even today on building some very elegant solutions, both for on-device memory and on-device storage. So I was hoping maybe you could speak just really quickly about the importance that it should be in top of mind for manufacturers and developers out there to have a solid ecosystem of partnership between essentially what I would consider to be best of breed component manufacturers.
You're absolutely right, Tom. And a lot of what we do when we're working with our partners is to make it so the end user doesn't even know what's happening. The fact that you have multiple neural processing units in your chipset now that help manage the AI, people don't know that. It's not advertised. You don't go to your telco and ask for that. It's just built into the phone. So the folks that do these system on chips, that do these great modems that work with 5G, they're constantly thinking about what their end user is going to need, and we're working very closely with them. So we have very deep ties into the silicon makers that are enabling handset, as well as even the OS developers, trying to make sure that the OS is thinking about the storage in the future and what it may be able to do to optimize to it. You mentioned before about there's a lot of logging and scratch pads that are on the storage. Well, we're working with them to make sure that as they build these scratch pads, we're not wearing out the storage, and that we're actually taking advantage of what the storage can provide and make it actually work in a better way. But our goal to the end user is not to wow them with how incredible all this technology is. Our goal is just basically make things better for them seamlessly. Seamless integration, seamless revolutionary technologies is really the way this works. Like I said, 10 years ago, a smartphone was defined as a phone that had a digital camera in it. In the future, as I was saying earlier, your smartphone is going to really be your digital companion. It's going to be teaching you things. It's going to be knowing where you are, what you want to do based upon where you are, who you're around. Again, it's going to come in this incremental way because all the revolutionary technology underneath it, end users don't need to know about it. We just need to go enable it and make it happen.
And I'm hoping that as well, that by working with the chip developers and so on, that you can encourage companies not to skimp here, because one of my greatest concerns is that companies will see invisible components like memory as a way to, underspec the phones to save a few pennies here and there. And that's going to cause big problems, I think, with these things. I mean, whether it's kind of starving the chips of one of their memory channels or using previous technology or not speccing it out enough. This is a critical component. But yet, if you ask people the specs of their phone, this is something that most people don't know. In fact, some of the vendors don't even disclose how much system memory there is on these devices. I would think that would be kind of a risk for you, wouldn't it?
Well, that's a good point, Stephen. But what we do is we work closely with them. And if you're someone making one of these SoCs, you actually have multiple tiers, just like any other, right? You have your super high end, what we call a flagship tier. You have a high end tier, mid and low end, based upon the end price of the phone. What we do is we work with them on their reference designs. So we make sure that as they're enabling their hardware, we work with them to make sure that they're enabling the right capacity points. So for example, we have 12 gigabyte, 14 gigabyte, there's 18 gigabytes of storage in some phones that are out there. You just may not know it. And we work with them to make sure they have the appropriate amount based upon what segment they're selling into and what end user benefit they're looking for. Additionally, an interesting point is things are very different around the world. In the United States, no one knows how much memory is in their phone. But if you go into China, it's actually similar to the PC wars, where they're trying to, each one is advertising, I've got 12 gigabyte, and the next person wants 14 gigabyte. And so there's actually sticker wars similar to what we saw in the 1990s and the 2000s with the megahertz and the gigahertz wars of the CPU. So it does vary in places over geographies. But you're right, we have to work very closely with the ecosystem. And of course, they want to work with us because they want to know exactly what they will need in order to have a successful client. What's really also starting to happen is the telcos. The telcos are starting to get more and more involved. In the early days, the telcos were more involved with specifying the phones to make sure that their end user, the ultimate client, actually had a good experience. But then as Gina was pointing out, the hardware really kind of outpaced everything going on around it. That's starting to flip a little bit with 5G. And the telcos are starting to become more and more interested in what should I do to make sure this person who's spending $100, $200, $300 a month for their family is getting the best experience possible, or the things that I can do in the memory to make sure that they're taking the best pictures, for example. Night mode takes a ton of memory, right, as it's processing in the AI. I'm sure Stephen, Dr. AI, you know that. And so these people, the telcos want to make sure their end users have a phone that's going to be able to do what they want to do. And so we can work with them to make sure that that happens as well.
Yeah, I think, some of the work I've done with people working in that telco area and the 5G area, especially, it is all about how do you make real-time experience happening. If I've got kids that are playing on their phones for some, whatever is the cool, I don't know, my kids don't tell me what they do anymore, like whatever the cool game is, and I live in the middle of nowhere, I want to make sure, like maybe I'm in Oklahoma or something, I don't know, but and maybe I'm far away from where the servers are that are serving up that phone. I want a phone that's going to be able to get to the game and not give me lag. I don't want to hear the kids yelling about that. Or if I'm doing this for a profession, I want it to really happen like that. Or, I think about my mom. There's all sorts of different stories you can think about. I think about my mom, who has been a K-pop fan forever and loves her Korean dramas and watches them only on her phone. She has a little laptop I gave her, but she only uses her phone for everything. How do we make sure that I don't have to get called to troubleshoot a phone? That she's constantly able to watch whatever K-pop drama it is, and she's able to go to the Google Translate and figure out the Korean to English thing with what she does. So, there's all sorts of reasons besides pictures. I think there's a lot more real-time, real-life experiences that companies are trying to figure out how to bring this cool real-time stuff, especially right now during COVID, where we couldn't go anywhere for the longest time. How do I make it seem real to you that we're watching a ball game or we're doing this? Like, how do I make you feel like you're here? And you need a mobile device for that. And I think this is where we'll be going. And this will be so common, but the phones we buy have to be able to support that. And I don't know, if you could convince them to make one that does all that, but can fit into my jeans pocket, that would be sweet.
You touched on a couple of really important items there. One of the things we're constantly looking at in terms of end user usage models is what happens when connectivity goes away. It started when people started playing games and watching videos, and they would get in trains in Japan where you don't necessarily have connectivity. And now a big one is people flying around the world. As the world is starting to open up again, there's a lot of people traveling, but you don't necessarily have the Wi-Fi on the plane. And when you do, I have 3 children. I have been fighting the Wi-Fi on those planes since they came out. And if you don't have it, you're stuck, right? And so download, to the point earlier about more and more storage, downloading more and more video as that video becomes 4K. I'm a big believer in immersive virtual reality. In the next 5 years is going to really take off. So you're going to see more 360-degree video, things like that. And then to your point too about being able to take the new world and what's coming. 360-degree video. I'm imagining the X Games in the future, where these, instead of having a little individual camera and someone's doing a 720 and it's just a blur, they're going to actually have a 360-degree camera broadcasting it in real time from their phone on their body. My son very likely will be sitting with his VR headset, actually knowing what it feels like to be doing these jumps that these guys are doing and all this amazing things that they're doing. You think like the Olympics of the future. You think of being able to select which video stream you want to be watching. This is enabled by 5G. In some cases, AI is going to be involved in terms of computational photography and selecting the right angles that you may prefer based upon your demography, or whatever you've seen in the past. But in addition to that, it's going to require a lot of memory and storage. You're going to have all these feeds coming in. It's not going to go straight to your DRAM to be processed. It's going to go to your NAND storage to be held and then processed based by what you actually want to see. All these things are going to be coming in concurrently and then processed individually.
This has been a pretty fascinating discussion about all of the intricacies that go into the average mobile device that we carry ubiquitously throughout our lives and probably will in the future. And I wanted to give the panelists kind of a chance to maybe add their last projections for what they're seeing. What does the future of AI and 5G look like to you, and how should the manufacturers really be considering what users are going to need to know about how their devices work and be able to consume content that could be created, years into the future that we have no idea about? Gina, I want to start with you. What do you think the future is going to look like, and what should the device manufacturers be telling the customers?
I think it's very exciting, the future. There's so many possibilities. And I honestly think the idea that if you build it, they will come. I think that we're going to see the innovations come from consumers, and we'll see people doing some really cool things. And hopefully they're building this platform that can accept the innovations that come from the way people want to use their devices. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up, that would be really great if there was some kind of way and some kind of storage reserve to do a fact check on what we're seeing in real time in 3D, if it's really what we think we're seeing. I think there's also a huge amount, as with all AI, for abuse, which has nothing to do with the chips. The chips just enable it. Maybe just stick a little bit of extra on there so we can have a way to figure out how to protect ourselves.
All right, Stephen?
Yeah, as the old saying goes, you can never be too rich or too thin. Well, you can never have too much processing power. You can never have too much memory. You can never have too much storage because, frankly, like a bowl of water will fill up with, if you leave it outside, it's going to fill up. You're going to use this. Programmers are going to find ways to use these processors. And frankly, if there's a lesson that we can draw from what's going on in mobile device development right now, these devices are getting much, 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 much more powerful. I mean, we're seeing dedicated AI processors. We're seeing many, many cores. Many people's phones are already faster than their laptops. And frankly, I think that that shows the direction that all of this is heading. We're going to have a lot more processing at the edge. We're going to have a lot more multimedia content thanks to 5G and the proliferation of sensors beyond cameras. And frankly, that's going to demand even more processing power and memory and storage as things go on because we're going to use it.
All right. And Chris, you're kind of uniquely positioned in this whole situation because you actually do have the ear of a lot of companies that are trying to make some of these solutions work for customers. So, as we look forward, what are some things that they need to be aware of? And honestly, if people want to learn a little bit more about some of the unique things that Micron brings to the table, where can they go to find out that information?
You're right, Tom. I've got a great job. I get to come to work every day and think about, this handset, this mobile device, and how it's going to talk to all the other devices, and what are the requirements behind that. And I'm surrounded by a bunch of great, really smart people at Micron, technologists thinking through the future in terms of how do we future-proof the hardware? How do we make it happen? I shared a little earlier, I'm a big believer in contextual awareness. Hopefully I'll get to eat those two pieces of pie. I'm a big believer that on top of that, someone out there is inventing something that we don't know about yet. I don't think that 10 years ago anybody thought that the digital marketplace would be what it is today, where you could try on a pair of glasses at home without even going to a store and know what they look like. Maybe some people thought about it, in terms of 1984 Orson Welles with the giant screen in front of you. But from a true technologist, I don't think people were really thinking that 10, 15 years ago. And so it's really exciting to think about what might come 10, 15 years from now that we have no idea about. And I'm certain that there are some kids in a college dorm somewhere working on something that we have no idea about. And that's really one of the fun things about where I work is it's constantly surprising. The mobile world moves so fast. And the requirements change so quickly. It requires deep technical engagements with our ecosystem partners, with our OEMs, with the telcos to try and understand what they see as the future as well. I'm really, really excited about it. To learn more about Micron, all the fun things we do, mobile in particular, technology, jobs, everything else, please visit www.micron.com/mobile. Thank you, Tom.
All right. Thank you very much for this great discussion. I want to thank Stephen and Gina and Chris and the folks from Micron for bringing you this discussion. If you'd like to check out more great technology roundtables like this, along with a lot of other great media content, please head over to our website at gestaltit.com. Check out our articles and our podcast. We have a lot of great technology discussions out there that you'll want to take advantage of. But for our panelists, for our friends at Micron, and for our great community out there, I want to say thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to bringing you more great discussions like this in the near future.